Shawn was his boy, and he was going to make Shawn the champion.
For years, fans thought Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels' rivalry was just wrestling drama. Two legends, big egos, big matches. But Bret says the real reason cuts much deeper. One backstage decision shifted everything, and it explains why the hatred never really died. The foundation of hatred. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were supposed to make each other rich. Hart saw Michaels as one of the hardest working wrestlers he ever stepped in the ring with. He wanted to build a rivalry that would draw money for years.
Big money, it's gonna be great. They're gonna think we really hate each other. And that's the sad thing, is that I meant to draw money with him and someday wrestle him and really make him, because I was a big fan of Shawn, and I loved his work, and I loved the way I thought he worked hard, and one of the hardest working wrestlers I ever stepped in the ring with. It was not a disrespectful thing that I was trying to do. I was, in my own way, trying to make him the way I felt I could make him.
Hart had plans. He envisioned a WrestleMania match where he and Michaels would tear the house down for 35 minutes. The match would duplicate the Iron Man match from WrestleMania 20, but with a different ending. Hart wanted to catch Michaels' super kick in midair, bring him to the ground, apply a shoot hold on his foot, and break it right in the middle of the ring. Michaels would tap out like fighters do in UFC. Hart would stand over him with the belt and deliver one final message.
Except for this time, I would take Shawn's foot and catch it in the air and bring him to the ground and put some kind of a shoot hold on his foot and break his foot right in the middle of the ring. And then I wanted Shawn to tap out like they do in UFC, where it's like, you know, when you break somebody's arm, they tap out pretty fast, and everyone jumps in, and it's a very serious kind of thing. And I wanted to break Shawn's foot, and then they'd hand me the belt and all that, and I would walk over and stand over top of him and go,
That match never happened. The rivalry that was supposed to make both men legends became something else entirely. The problem started with one conversation. Hart approached Michaels in San Jose about a month before Survivor Series 1997. They were scheduled to wrestle each other. Hart wanted to clear the air. He told Michaels he had no problem doing anything Michaels wanted. He would drop the belt. He wanted Michaels to know that if they were ever in the ring together, Michaels was always safe. Hart considered himself a total professional. If he had issues with someone, he would handle them in the dressing room, never in the ring.
I said, we're wrestling each other at Survivor Series in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something. And he said, yeah, I just found out today. And I said, I just want you to know, I have no problem doing anything you want. I said, I know we've had our issues. I said, but if I got to drop the belt to you, I have no problem with that. And I want you to know that if you're ever in the ring with me, you're always safe. I'm a total professional. I would never take, if I've got some kind of issue with you, I'll talk to you in the dressing room or something, but I'll never take those things to the ring. That's the time when you have to be professional. And I remember I said that to him, and I remember Shawn looked at me, and this is where it all came from, is he looked at me and said, well, I appreciate that, but I just want you to know that I'm not willing to do the same thing for you.
Hart had just promised to drop the title to Michaels. Michaels told him to stick it. That conversation set everything in motion. Hart pinpoints this exchange as the origin of the Montreal Screwjob. WWF management claimed a forfeit or disqualification finish was taboo. Hart watched television years later and saw belts forfeited without controversy. The rules that supposedly prevented alternative finishes did not exist. At Survivor Series 1997 in Montreal, Hart defended the WWF Championship against Michaels in his home country. He was leaving for WCW due to contract disputes. What happened next changed wrestling history. During the match, Michaels applied Hart's own sharpshooter. Referee Earl Hebner rang the bell. Hart never submitted. The title was awarded to Michaels. Hart reacted with fury. He spat at Vince McMahon and destroyed equipment at ringside. Hart began noticing things that made him suspicious. During the 1997 Royal Rumble buildup, Michaels delivered his infamous "Lost My Smile" promo. He stood in the ring talking about losing his passion for wrestling. He cried. Hart was watching in the dressing room with The Undertaker. They both noticed something strange.
I remember looking in the dressing room. Undertaker was right beside me, and we're both looking at Vince, and Vince is in the back stage area crying. Like I could see the tears. Tears came down his face. I remember Vince wiping his tears. And I'm going, looked at Undertaker, and Undertaker goes, holy shit, like he couldn't believe it. I remember Undertaker looking at his eye, like he pulled his eye down like this and looked at me like, there's something fishy going on here.
McMahon then called a meeting. The top guys gathered in one room: Steve Austin, Undertaker, Vader, Psycho Sid, Triple H. McMahon announced that Michaels was forfeiting the title due to a career-ending knee injury. Hart had wrestled Michaels the night before. Michaels had done a standing backflip off the top turnbuckle and walked back to the dressing room without any sign of injury.
I wrestled Shawn the night before, and he did a standing backflip off the top turnbuckle and walked back to the dressing room like nothing ever happened. I'm like, when did he hurt his knee? And it's like all of a sudden he's got this knee injury.
Hart did not believe the knee injury was real. Neither did Undertaker, according to Hart. The whole situation felt manufactured. The summer before the Screwjob, WWF had tried to bring Hart back. McMahon asked Hart what he wanted to do upon his return. Hart said he wanted to wrestle Michaels in a rematch for the title, beat him, and turn heel. McMahon signed off on the plan. Jim Ross was present and would remember the conversation. Instead, Hart was thrown into a no-holds-barred match with Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13. The promised title match against Michaels never materialized. Hart believed the politics had shifted against him. Hart watched Steve Austin's momentum build week after week. He made a decision. He would throw all his weight behind Austin. He wanted Austin to become champion instead of Michaels because he did not like the politics surrounding Michaels' position.
I'm going to throw all my weight behind Steve. And because I want to see Steve become champion, not Shawn, because I didn't like the politics of it. Still don't. And Steve was just a guy in the company.
But the forces aligned against Hart were stronger than one match could overcome: the Screwjob and its immediate aftermath. The Montreal Screwjob became the most reported wrestling news story of its era. What promoters had done for decades, taking their belts back through double crosses, transformed into something that defined careers and reshaped an entire industry. The personalities involved elevated a backstage power play into mythology.
It has to be the single most reported and covered wrestling news story in my lifetime. And I mean, it really wasn't even a story outside of the purview of what would happen in wrestling. I mean, that shit, promoters taking their belts, has happened all the time.
Nash believed the personalities made the difference. McMahon recognized an opportunity and exploited it to maximum advantage. Steve Austin once described McMahon in a word association exercise. He did not particularly like him, but the man was pretty much close to genius. For Hart, the Screwjob ended his WWF career on a sour note. He joined WCW but faced poor booking almost immediately. The creative direction that had made him a star in WWF did not translate to his new home. Then came the injury that would change everything. In 1999, Bill Goldberg delivered a kick that gave Hart a severe concussion. The career-ending nature of the injury became apparent over time. Hart's in-ring work was finished. Then in 2002, a debilitating stroke further compromised his health. The man who had been one of the most technically gifted performers in wrestling history found himself unable to perform at all. Michaels also faced career difficulties after Montreal. A severe back injury forced his retirement in 1998 after losing to Steve Austin at WrestleMania 14. The two men who had defined the WWF's transition period found themselves on the sidelines simultaneously, though for different reasons. During this period, Hart and Michaels had no contact whatsoever. Hart harbored deep resentment over the betrayal. Michaels dealt with personal demons, including substance abuse. In interviews and autobiographies, the bitterness flowed freely. Hart accused Michaels of being unprofessional and manipulative. Michaels would later admit regret while defending his actions as business necessities. The separation lasted over a decade. During those years, Hart's view of what happened in Montreal crystallized into something more specific than simple betrayal.
I actually believe, in all honesty, that I think there was a love affair going on between Shawn and Vince. I mean that with all sincerity. I don't say that to be just to put. I think there was something going on there, and it sounds pretty reasonable if you think about it today. Like, these are all things I thought at the time, but now it's all these years later. I'm like, I think there's a lot more going on there than people think. boy toy and all that kind of stuff.
Hart connected the dots between Michaels' boy toy persona and what he perceived as an unusually close relationship with the boss. He believed McMahon's emotional investment in Michaels went beyond a promoter's interest in his champion.
I just think that that Vince was going to put the belt on Shawn because he was in love with him, and that's. I don't mean that in a jokey way. I mean it was dead serious, and that's all that mattered to it. And Shawn was his boy, and he was going to make Shawn the champion. And Kevin Nash was a guy that wasn't ready to be champion, but Shawn was a guy that had been dreaming about it since he was old enough to remember what wrestling was.
Hart drew a distinction between Nash's title reign and Michaels' position. Nash, in Hart's view, received the championship despite not being ready. Michaels received it because of his relationship with McMahon. The difference was personal favoritism born from something deeper than wrestling ability. The speculation about McMahon and Michaels had circulated in wrestling circles for decades. Michaels' rapid rise despite his smaller stature compared to the era's muscular ideals fueled backstage gossip. Pushes were linked to physical appeal or personal connections. Michaels' name came up frequently in these discussions. Hart's accusations gave voice to whispers that had existed since the 1990s. In a 1997 Calgary Sun column just before Survivor Series, Hart had accused Michaels of being a whore for this business and implied he climbed through questionable means. The public allegations in 2025 represented the explicit version of attacks Hart had been making for nearly 3 decades. The years of separation allowed both men to reflect. Michaels found redemption through Christianity. His substance abuse problems became part of his testimony about personal transformation. Hart dealt with the physical and emotional aftermath of his career, the stroke, the loss of his brother Owen in a WWF ring, the recognition that his best years were behind him. By 2010, both men had reached a point where reconciliation seemed possible. Tyson Kidd, a wrestler with connections to both men, helped relay positive messages between them. The groundwork was laid for what would become a historic moment. On January 4th, 2010, Hart appeared on Monday Night Raw as a guest host. 12 years had passed since Montreal. Hart called Michaels out to the ring for a face-to-face confrontation. Their first contact since November 1997. The handshake happened. The embrace followed. The feud appeared to be over. The fragile peace. Hart had doubts about reconciling with Michaels. Before their meeting in Dayton, he predicted he would regret the decision within months. He expected Michaels would not change and the gesture would mean nothing.
And I always thought, I said, when I went back, and even before I met Shawn, the day of that Monday Night Raw in Dayton, I remember thinking, I'm going to probably look back about 3 or 4 months from now and be really sorry that I ever did any of this with him. That he's not going to change, that it's not going to mean anything to him. And I was just... I just kind of guessed that, and I was wrong, and I'm glad I was wrong.
Hart was wrong. Michaels appreciated the gesture more than Hart had anticipated. Hart believed Michaels had been carrying guilt and shame over Montreal for years. The screw job was something to be ashamed of. Wrestling was built on trust and respect. Michaels had violated both in 1997.
Shawn came back, and I think I always say this about it, he appreciated that gesture so much. It was like I think he was under so much guilt and shame, and what he did was something to be ashamed of. And it was wrestling is all about trust and respect. And he didn't have the trust and respect for me in the first place back then, which is how that whole storyline happened.
The peace between Hart and Michaels held. Both men appeared at Hall of Fame ceremonies. Hart inducted in 2006 and again in 2019 with the Hart Foundation. Michaels inducted in 2011 and again in 2019 with D-Generation X. Hart praised Michaels' in-ring talent despite their history. The public narrative shifted from bitter enemies to respected rivals who had found common ground. In 2022, WWE arranged a reunion between the two men for the WWE Network. The conversation revealed how far they had come. Michaels acknowledged his lack of maturity during the height of their feud. Hart recognized that their rivalry would live forever in wrestling history. Both men seemed to have made peace with their shared past. The WrestleMania 2-themed Iron Man match, the hour-long contest that had once represented everything wrong between them, became a source of pride for both. Michaels called it a masterpiece. Hart counted it among his best memories. Hart expressed regret about the opportunities they had squandered. record. He believed he and Michaels could have wrestled once every year for a decade and produced the biggest matches in wrestling history. The personal animosity had robbed both men and their fans of potential classics. Michaels echoed the sentiment. He would love to go back and avoid the mistakes he made, but he also recognized where those mistakes had led him. The conversation turned to family. Michaels mentioned that they were not best friends, but Hart reached out on birthdays and wedding anniversaries. The professional respect had evolved into something resembling genuine warmth. They discussed being fathers and the joy of that conversation. Hart expressed a wish that they could go back and redo everything because there was nothing but magic left between them as performers. Hart had learned something valuable from his reconciliation with Michaels. He spoke about the importance of making peace with things that eat away at you.
Shawn and I made a peace that was very real, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I dug deep into my own sort of soul and said, I'll make peace with this guy, even though I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. And I can only say to people in life, in their own lives, if you got something that's really eating away at you and kind of destroying you, dig it up and open it up and get it out of the way. Make peace with it and say goodbye. Like, don't keep dragging around a lot of pain. And that's what I learned from that whole thing with Shawn, and that was a good lesson to learn.
The lesson appeared to have been learned. The peace appeared to be genuine. For over a decade, Hart and Michaels maintained cordial relations. The wrestling world accepted that one of its most bitter rivalries had found resolution. Then came November 2025. Hart was invited to speak at an event in Montreal, coinciding with the anniversary of the Screwjob. The Johnny I Pro Show gave him a platform to revisit the defining moment of his career. What emerged from that interview shattered any illusion that Hart had truly moved past what happened in 1997. The reconciliation that had seemed so complete suddenly appeared hollow. Hart's willingness to shake Michaels' hand in 2010, his kind words in 2022, his advice about letting go of pain, all of it existed alongside accusations that Michaels had advanced his career through sexual favors to the boss. The 2025 allegations. The allegations Hart made in November 2025 were specific and unambiguous. He was not speaking in code or using wrestling terminology. He stated plainly that he believed Michaels and McMahon had been lovers. Hart cited the 1997 Lost My Smile promo as evidence. He recalled watching McMahon's reaction backstage, the tear rolling down McMahon's cheek as Michaels spoke about losing his passion for wrestling. Hart remembered thinking there must be more going on between them.
Vince was going to put the belt on Shawn because he was in love with him, and that's I don't mean that in a jokey way. I mean it was dead serious, and that's all that mattered to him. And Shawn was his boy, and he was going to make Shawn the champion.
Hart connected this observation to the broader pattern of favoritism Michaels enjoyed, the sudden knee injury that forced Michaels to vacate the title, the protection McMahon provided even when Michaels' behavior was unprofessional, the way McMahon consistently chose Michaels over Hart despite Hart's willingness to cooperate. The accusations went further than mere favoritism. Hart alleged that Michaels used his body to secure his position. Shawn was so envious and jealous of my position that he finally had to sleep with Vince to get it. Hart framed himself as a victim caught between two people whose romantic relationship excluded him from the inner circle. Hart emphasized that he was not joking. He was not trying to be mean or start problems. He was speaking what he believed to be the truth based on what he observed during his time in WWF. He said he would make these statements directly to Michaels or McMahon if given the opportunity. The reaction from wrestling veterans was swift and largely negative. Jim Ross, who worked closely with McMahon, Hart, and Michaels during the 1990s, dismissed the claims on his Grilling JR podcast. He called the accusation bullshit and suggested Hart was deliberately stirring the shit to provoke reactions. Ross noted that Hart knows how to push buttons. He also pointed out that Michaels was in a different mindset during the relevant period due to personal struggles, making the accusation implausible in his view. Kevin Nash, Michaels' close friend and fellow member of the Clique, addressed the allegations on his Clique This podcast. Nash attributed Hart's words to lingering bitterness rather than any basis in fact.
In the past year, I feel like Bret has said one outrageous thing after the next. Is it in an effort to stay in the news, to stay relevant? What's going on with Bret?
Nash revealed that he spent 3 years traveling extensively with Michaels. He never witnessed anything that would support Hart's allegations. The only time he saw McMahon was during specific business situations, not during their personal time.
I have no idea. I mean, I spent the better part of 3 years of my life with Shawn Michaels, And I never remember having a double knockout with Vince during any of our travel. I mean, the only time I saw Vince was when we were getting ready to strike in Indianapolis.
Nash made a pointed observation about the nature of Hart's claims. Hart was putting allegations out in public, but framing them as things he was sure about without any actual evidence.
See, that's one of those things where you tell a story like that, and you say, I'm sure, but no, you're not.
No, this is all his speculation. He
Right.
saw nothing. He didn't walk in on, Pat Patterson or anything like that.
Nash considered the accusations to be in poor taste given the context of the Screwjob anniversary. He expressed frustration that the most covered story in wrestling history continued to generate controversy nearly 3 decades later.
And that's what I wonder about.
I think
Like,
it's
what's this
I
all
think it's
about?
well, I think it's in poor taste.
No
I
pun.
mean, I know they're talking about the screw job.
Eric Bischoff, former WCW president and someone who had dealt with Hart during his post-WWF career, offered his perspective on 83 Weeks. Bischoff recommended that Hart seek therapy to let go of his past baggage. He rejected any suggestion that Hart's remarks were intended as humor. Jim Cornette, the veteran manager and wrestling historian, also weighed in on the allegations. The wrestling community's response ranged from dismissal to disappointment that Hart would make such claims after the apparent reconciliation. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.